Hi, welcome to my channel, where every story hits different. Hit subscribe, and let's dive in. My 27th birthday should have lasted 10 quiet minutes. A cake, one forced smile, maybe a cheap candle from the grocery store, and the usual fake family photo for social media. Instead, my mother slid a white envelope across the dining table and said, "Go on, sweetheart, your annual salary." The room was already waiting to laugh before I even touched it. I opened the flap, and a single $1 bill slipped into my palm with a note folded around it like a blade. For the worthless loser who will never amount to anything. My throat locked, but I did not give them the satisfaction of blinking too fast. The woman who gave birth to me leaned back like she had performed at Carnegie Hall. My older sister nearly choked, laughing. My father drummed his fingers on the table and called it my first real paycheck. An uncle at the far end muttered that even panhandlers pulled in more. The frosting on the cake had started melting under the warm kitchen light, and all I could smell was burnt sugar and cheap wine and the old sour scent of people who loved humiliation more than honesty. I smiled anyway, not because it did not hurt, because something in me had finally gone still. Later that night, on my way to the mudroom, I heard them whispering in the kitchen. "Make her sleep outside," one voice said. "Maybe one night in the cold will teach the lazy bum some gratitude." Hours later, they were the ones outside my door, sobbing, pounding, screaming my name, begging me to let them in before the cold finished what their pride had started. My name is Claire Bennett, and by 27 I had already learned the first rule of surviving my family. Never confuse being needed with being loved. They called me lazy because my schedule looked strange to people who measured worth by appearances instead of results. I worked nights and weekends as a refrigeration systems technician for a commercial service company in Columbus, Ohio. I repaired walk-in freezers, grocery store cooling lines, restaurant systems, warehouse chillers, and anything else that failed when everyone wanted to be asleep. My hands usually smelled like metal, insulation foam, and machine oil. My boots were scuffed. My shoulders ached. My bank account, however, was stronger than anyone in that house ever imagined. I was one of the highest-rated emergency techs on my team. I had stacked overtime, certifications, referral bonuses, and disciplined savings until I quietly bought a duplex on the west side and moved one step closer to a life they could not touch. I never told them, because in my family, information was not trust. It was ammunition. My father had not held steady work in years, but he never ran out of speeches. My mother, Denise, curated an image of sacrifice online like she expected applause for every holiday centerpiece and passive-aggressive quote. My sister Megan floated between part-time jobs, dramatic posts, and blaming me for existing in ways she could not control. If the house needed a villain, they picked me. If the bills needed a miracle, they called me. If their shame needed somewhere to land, they aimed it at me and acted surprised when I stopped reacting. The dollar bill hurt, but the planning behind it hurt more. The note had neat folds. Somebody had written it early, saved it, and carried it into dinner like a prop. They wanted tears, shouting, maybe a scene they could later retell as proof that I was unstable. Instead, I folded the note back along the same lines, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and listened in the hallway long enough to hear the rest of the plan. Lock the mudroom after she goes out. Let her figure it out. Leave her the dog blanket as a joke. They were not blowing off steam. They were coordinating. That was when the last soft part of my denial finally burned out. I took my keys, my work duffel, and the envelope, walked out before they could stage their little punishment, and drove straight to the one person who had never once confused my pain with permission. Owen Parker opened his apartment door at 10:43 that night in thermal socks and an old Ohio State hoodie, looked at my face, and simply stepped aside. "Take the couch now. I will make coffee." He did not interrogate me. He did not rush to solve me. He had known me since trade school, back when instructors assumed the women in our program would wash out by midterm and I kept passing practicals anyway. He was the first person who saw me replace a compressor under pressure and smiled like competence was something worth honoring. That night, I handed him the dollar and the note. He read both, looked at me, and asked only one thing: "Are you keeping this?" "Yes." "Good. Because one day they are going to act like none of it happened." He was right. The next morning I went to work instead of back to my parents' place. A failed freezer does not care whether your family is cruel. A bakery manager with $20,000 of inventory warming under bad airflow does not care whether your mother called you ungrateful. They care whether you can find the leak, replace the part, document the fault, and get the system running before dawn. That kind of honesty saved me. For weeks I slept at Owen's place between shifts, property viewings, and the quiet legal work of separating my life from theirs. I lived in the duplex I had purchased, rented out the second unit to Mrs. Alvarez, a retired teacher who watered her porch plants like children and baked lemon bars as if sugar could rebuild a nervous system. My family had no idea I owned the place. They still thought I drifted between weird jobs and bad decisions. I let them keep underestimating me because it made them careless. The deeper truth came out in fragments. Megan mocked one of my public work photos online before deleting the comment when she realized other people could see it. Denise posted vague graphics about ungrateful daughters and sacrifice. My father left a blocked voicemail calling the dollar a joke and my silence embarrassing. I saved everything. Then an aunt accidentally called me instead of Denise and gave away what nobody in that house had admitted. Rent was behind. Utility shutoff notices had already arrived twice. My father had tied himself to a private loan from one of his friends, Ray Colton, a smiling disaster with the exact kind of face people trusted before they regretted it. Denise had sold my grandmother's wedding ring and lied about it. Megan had buried herself in credit card debt while talking about building a brand. They were not in temporary trouble. They were collapsing. And still they did not call to ask whether I was safe after that birthday. They called only when they started needing access again. 3 weeks later, Denise finally rang from her real number, her voice coated in sweetness so thick it almost sounded sticky. "Claire, honey, we have all calmed down. Let us have dinner and start over." Start over. As if humiliation became harmless if you gave it time to cool. I said no. She cried immediately. "Your father is under stress. Megan is too. We are family. Family should not keep score. People who benefit from your silence always call accountability scorekeeping." I told her I was at work and hung up. Not long after that, Owen sent me a photo he took outside a grocery store. My father was in a parking lot arguing with Ray Colton beside a dented truck, all false confidence gone from his posture. An hour later, my aunt texted, "They are saying you owe them money now. Be careful." That was the moment my anger stopped being emotional and became strategic. I gathered screenshots, dates, voicemails, old requests for temporary help that somehow never returned, and every hint that they were preparing to rewrite history with me as the villain. I booked a consultation through my company employee assistance program and sat across from an attorney who tapped the folded birthday note with one manicured finger before saying, "This is coercive family behavior. Keep records. Do not co-sign anything. Do not let them establish residence with you, even for one night. If they come to your property, remember that compassion is not the same as surrender." That line stayed in my head because it named the trap perfectly. My family had trained me to confuse access with obligation. The truth was simpler. They could need me without being entitled to me. Then Ohio turned brutal. Late January came in with freezing rain, black ice, and the kind of forecast that makes even confident people nervous. By then, I already knew the house was unstable, the utilities unreliable, the landlord impatient, and Ray Colton circling. Megan texted first. "Can we use your place for one night? Do not be dramatic. We just need a little space because the heat is acting up here." No apology, no acknowledgement, just entitlement in a cleaner coat. I replied with one word, "No." She answered in under 30 seconds. "Wow, so you would really let your own family freeze?" I looked at the screen and heard the kitchen whisper from my birthday, "Make her sleep outside." I did not answer again. That night, the storm hit harder than predicted. I finished an emergency cooler call, drove home carefully, checked the duplex furnace twice out of habit, changed into dry clothes, and started heating canned soup while sleet ticked against the windows like thrown pebbles. Mrs. Alvarez had gone to stay with her daughter, so the house was quiet except for the low mechanical hum of a system I had personally serviced. Then my phone lit up with missed calls from numbers I recognized. A second later, the pounding started. It was not polite knocking. It was full-body panic smashing against my front door hard enough to shake the frame. I moved to the hall window and looked through the narrow gap in the curtain. There they were. Denise in a soaked wool coat, hair plastered to her face. My father bareheaded, yelling between coughs. Megan wrapped in a blanket already wet through. Behind them, an uncle hunched inside a car that would not start. For one suspended second, nobody in me moved. I had imagined apologies before. I had even imagined them crying. I had never imagined how small they would look with fear finally louder than ego. "Open the door," my father shouted. "Please, we are freezing." Megan was crying now. Not angrily, but with the raw, helpless sound people make when reality finally gets personal. I unlocked only the inner storm door and kept the deadbolt set on the main one. Enough to hear. Not enough to let momentum decide for me. What happened? Denise pressed both hands to the glass. The furnace died. The space heaters blew a circuit. The landlord came. Ray showed up too. There was shouting. Somebody called the police. We had to leave. "Please, baby. Just tonight." I looked at my father. His eyes slid away first. "Why are you here?" "Because we need help." "No," I said. "Why are you here?" The wind cracked around the porch. Finally, he muttered, "Because you are the only one who has somewhere warm." There it was. Not love. Not regret. Utility. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the folded birthday note I still kept like a splinter. "Do you remember this?" Denise shut her eyes. "Claire, not now." "Exactly now." Megan started shaking her head. "We said we were sorry." "You laughed," I said. "All of you laughed. Then you planned to lock me out in the cold." My father stiffened on instinct. Then the cold seemed to beat the pride out of him. "We were wrong." Hearing that word did not heal anything. It only proved how long they could have chosen it and refused. I felt anger, validation, grief, and a strange emptiness under all of it. Their truth came late, and late truth is never the same as care. Denise started sobbing harder. "Please, we are begging you." I thought of the attorney's warning and made the choice I could live with. I opened the door just far enough to place a plain white envelope on the porch. Megan grabbed it first. Inside was a single $1 bill and a note that read, "One cold night teaches gratitude." Denise made a sound so broken it almost seemed to come from someplace older than that evening. My father flared in disbelief. "Are you out of your mind?" "No," I said, finally thinking clearly. I let the moment sit long enough for them to feel what humiliation looked like from the outside. Then I set a plastic tote beside the envelope. Before anyone rewrites this into cruelty, here is what I actually did. I had already called the emergency warming center on Broad Street when the pounding began, because I recognized panic before I opened the curtain. I knew the church gym was doing overnight intake. I knew my truck carried thermal blankets, gloves, hand warmers, water, protein bars, and spare ponchos, because that is how people who work in winter prepare for things. "In there," I said, "are blankets, gloves, hand warmers, and the shelter address. Intake is open until midnight. They will take all of you. I already called ahead." My father looked insulted, which would have been funny if it were not so revealing. "You would send your own family to a shelter. You tried to make me sleep outside for entertainment," I said. "I am sending you somewhere safe." Megan's face crumpled. "Please, just let Mom in. Then take her to the shelter." Denise whispered my name like a prayer she should have learned years earlier. "I know we hurt you. I know we did. But can you just not do this like this? Hurt us more gently," she meant. "Preserve our dignity while we stand on the ruins of yours." I shook my head. "No, not like this anymore." Then I said the sentence I had needed all my life. "You do not get emergency access to me just because your choices became inconvenient." Being my parents does not make my home your backup plan. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then my uncle stumbled from the car, grabbed the tote, and swore under his breath. Megan kept crying. Denise looked 10 years older. My father looked stripped of costume. It was the first honest portrait of my family I had ever seen. Not powerful, not righteous, not united. Just frightened adults discovering that manipulation stops working when the target learns the mechanism. Take the blankets. Take the address. Go now. Denise bent, picked up the envelope again, and held it against her chest. Is this what you wanted? To watch us suffer? No, I said. What I wanted was for you to stop before it came to this. They left without grace. My father still cursed. Megan nearly slipped on the walkway. Denise turned once under the porch light with sleet speckling her coat and looked at me with something trapped between shame and revelation. Then the cars crawled away toward the warming center. I locked the door, pressed my forehead to the wood, and shook so hard I had to sit on the floor. Boundaries are expensive when you were raised to call them betrayal. Owen arrived 20 minutes later after I texted only 4 words. They came here tonight. He brought tea, took in the tote missing from the porch, and listened without trying to own the moment. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you think you did the right thing?" I looked at the deadbolt, the note still in my hand, and said, "I think I did the thing that did not destroy me." The next morning, the rest of the story reached me in pieces. The landlord had removed my parents after months of arrears, property damage, and one last chaotic night involving a failed heater setup, Ray Colton, and neighbors who were done pretending not to hear arguments through the wall. Nobody was arrested, but the house was over. Ray disappeared. The second legal attention entered the scene. Denise stayed temporarily with my aunt. Megan landed on a cousin's couch, on the condition that she find work within a week. My father bounced between borrowed rooms and offended pride. The family that once laughed around a birthday cake as if they were untouchable split the moment real life stopped giving them extensions. 3 days later, Denise texted a picture of the envelope I had left on the porch. The dollar bill was still inside. Beneath the image, she wrote, "I have read this 20 times. I think I finally understand what you felt." I stared at the message for a long time before answering. "You understand one night of it. I lived years of it." She replied that evening with the cleanest sentence she had ever sent me. "You are right." Over the next month, reality did what no fight ever had. My father could not bluff a landlord, a lender, the weather, or shelter intake rules. Megan could not brand her way out of overdue balances and burned bridges. Denise, stripped of audience, finally had to face the fact that her whole version of motherhood had been built on performance, hierarchy, and convenience instead of care. Shame did not transform them into saints, but it did push honesty into the room. My father left alternating voicemails full of anger and self-pity before silence replaced both. Megan sent a stiff message about a job interview at a dental office and trying not to mess it up. Denise asked if she could meet in public, not to ask for anything, only to talk. I made her wait a week, then chose a diner halfway across town at noon. Neutral ground. Bright windows. No family stage. She arrived early in a navy coat shiny at the elbows, no dramatic makeup, no speech for social media, just Denise Bennett with both hands wrapped around an untouched coffee cup. "I used to think being the parent meant I got to define what happened," she said after I sat down. "If I called it teasing, it was teasing. If I called it discipline, it was discipline. If I called you ungrateful, then your hurt did not matter." She swallowed. I was wrong. There it was again. Wrong. I did not rush to comfort her. She kept going. "When you did not open the door, I hated you for 10 minutes. Then we got to that shelter, and I saw mothers with children, old men with nowhere to go, women trying not to cry in folding chairs. And all I could think was, I did this to my own daughter for sport. I wanted you to feel powerless so I could feel in control." I let the silence work. Then I asked, "So what now?" Maybe she expected forgiveness to function like a reset button. Maybe she finally understood that remorse without change is just another performance. "Now," she said. I get therapy. I get a job. I stop asking you to fix what I helped break. And if you never trust me again, I live with that. That answer frightened me more than anger would have, because it made reconciliation sound possible, and possibility is harder than simple cutoff. I told her the truth. I am not ready to let you back into my life the way you want. She nodded immediately. I know. You will not get a key to my house. You will not borrow money from me. You will not tell people we are close again because we had one conversation. I know, she said. For the first time in my life, I believed she might actually hear me. My father changed slower and uglier. He took temporary contract work through one of my aunt's contacts and spent weeks blaming bad luck before admitting even once that disaster in his life usually carried his fingerprints. We are not close. We may never be. Megan did get that dental office job. A month later, she sent me a picture of her first real paycheck and wrote, I thought about the dollar. I get it now. I did not answer immediately, but I did answer. Growth deserves witness, even when trust has not returned. Spring finally came. I sanded and repainted the porch frame they had dented with their fists. Mrs. Alvarez brought out lemonade, squinted at the fresh color, and said the house looked stronger. Maybe she was right. Maybe homes absorb what we survive. Work stayed steady. My body remembered alarms, ladders, frozen pipes, and midnight repair calls, but my nervous system slowly stopped expecting my mother's voice every time a floorboard shifted. Owen remained what he had always been, a man who knew how to stand near wreckage without making it about himself. Some nights we sat on my back steps after long shifts saying almost nothing while the city settled. Other nights he helped me organize receipts for taxes, laughed at Mrs. Alvarez's stories, or reminded me to eat before my next emergency call. He never asked me to forgive faster. He never suggested that blood required access. By early summer, I realized peace was arriving in ordinary clothes. Just fewer flinches, better sleep, cleaner air in my own kitchen. Denise did start therapy. She found part-time work at a florist, and to her credit, stopped fishing for sympathy online. She texted sparingly, usually to acknowledge a boundary instead of testing it. Megan kept the dental job, moved into a room with 2 coworkers, and for the first time in her life began learning the humiliating but useful math of rent, groceries, and time. My father remained the least changed, though even he seemed quieter when we crossed paths once at my aunt's place. He looked older, smaller too, like certainty had finally lost weight. He mumbled that the winter had been rough. I told him winter was not the problem. Choices were. He had no answer. Around that same time, I finally forced myself to do something I had postponed for years. I opened every old folder, every screenshot, every voicemail transcript, every transfer receipt, and every note I had made after nights when their words were ugly enough to deserve a timestamp. I built a full timeline for myself. Not for court, and not for revenge, but because people raised in chaos are taught to distrust their own memory. When I laid it all out in order, the pattern was brutal and simple. The insults always rose right before a request. The guilt always arrived after a boundary. The fake warmth always appeared when there was a bill, a shortage, a debt, or an audience. Love had never been the operating system in that house. Access was. Once I saw that clearly, something in me stopped bargaining with the past. Owen looked over the stack one evening at my kitchen table and said, "You were not carrying a family. You were carrying a private emergency fund with feelings attached." I laughed because the sentence was dry enough to break the tension, but he was right. After that, I made practical changes. I updated the cameras at my duplex. I changed emergency contacts. I separated savings. I stopped answering blocked calls. None of it felt cruel. It felt sane. Denise noticed the distance, but, to her credit, did not challenge every inch of it. Once, she asked if I thought she would ever be invited over. I told her maybe one day, but maybe was not a promise. She said she understood and, for once, let the sentence stand without trying to climb over it. That did not mean trust returned. It meant reality had finally started teaching where I no longer had to. One warm evening while switching jackets, I found the original birthday note in a pocket. The paper had softened at the folds, and the ink had blurred slightly from the night my hands sweated around it. I carried it to the metal fire bowl in the backyard, lit one corner, and watched the words curl inward until they became black flakes and lifted into the dark. That was the part nobody celebrates in revenge stories because it is too quiet for spectacle. The real victory is not when people beg. It is not when they finally admit you were right. It is not even when consequences land exactly where they belong. The real victory is the day their version of you loses access to your mind. It is the day their cruelty stops narrating your life. So yes, my parents gave me $1 for my birthday and a note calling me worthless. Yes, hours later they were outside my door in the freezing dark, pounding and pleading and learning that the daughter they dismissed had become the only stable person left in their orbit. But the most important part of that night is not that I made them hurt. It is that I refused to let their hurt turn me into them. I did not open my door and surrender. I did not leave them outside in danger. I sent them somewhere safe and let reality do the teaching they had delayed for years. That is what made the lesson stick. Titles do not excuse cruelty. Family does not erase consequences. And if you spend years treating someone like they are disposable, one day you may find yourself standing in the cold, begging the very person you trained to live without you.